Hey guys, so in today's video I wanted to give you a tutorial on how I paint hair, and just before I begin telling you how I do it, I just wanted to give a couple of disclaimers. The first one is, I know this is not inclusive of all hair types, and I'm totally aware of that. It's not like I think this is how all hair should be painted. This is just the way I paint my most popular hairstyles, and I had a hard time figuring out what type of hair I should paint for this tutorial just because there's so many hairstyles and I couldn't paint all of them. These ones alone took an hour and 30 minutes, so I was really wondering which ones I should paint, and I asked on my Instagram, and I finally came to the conclusion that I should probably paint the hairstyles that I do most often, because they're my signature, and I'll talk about how I paint those. And if you want me to paint any other type of hairstyles in the future, just please comment down below and let me know. I was planning on probably making a part 2 to this tutorial talking about other hair types, and if you just comment down below and let me know what types of hair you would like me to paint, I can choose the ones that are most popular and make a video on those. And just before I start anything, I wanted to let you know that I'm working in Krita, which I have a video on a Krita introduction if you're wondering how the program works, which is going to be on the screen right now. And I am using just 2 brushes in this video, the basic airbrush and the bristles hairy brush, and I also have a video on which brushes I use and it explains them in greater detail, so I have a link on the screen right now. And I'm also using my Huion WH1409 tablet for this, and if you're wondering how it works, I have a tablet review on my channel for this tablet, and it's going to be on the screen as well right now. Okay, so I think I have everything out of the way. Just please don't comment anything mean about me not being inclusive of like natural hair and things like that. I don't paint them very often, and I thought I would paint something that I was very comfortable with and let you know how I deal with those things. So the first thing that I always do is I make a new layer and I start working on the sketch of the hair, and I always work with a sketch. I always start at the root of the hair. I guess it just gives me a base to know where the part is going to be and where all the rest of the root is going to be, all around the temple and all that. And I always start with a sketch because it lets me know the outline of the hair. When I just go in and try to block it in with color, it becomes very muddy and it's very hard for me to figure out what the shape of the hair is and what it's doing. So whenever I start drawing hair, I think of the hair in sections and I kind of try to envision what it's going to be doing. For this painting, I wanted her to have this swirly, wavy, curly hair that was very swishy and flowy. And so I also draw the silhouette of the hair when I'm sketching, and it lets me know what the shape of the hair is going to be and what it's going to be doing. And when you're painting in an environment, it's very good to do this because it lets you know where the hair is going to be specifically. You know, you don't have to start figuring out where it's going to be when you've drawn all these hair strands and all that. It's kind of nice to just establish the basic shape to begin with and treat the hair in sections and blocks and try to imagine it coming from different sections at the top of the head. I wouldn't make them too big, some of the sections. It depends on what kind of hair you're drawing, but make sure that you're also drawing the sections in a way that they're interacting with the body. So if they're going behind the neck, in front of the neck, over the shoulder, behind the shoulder, and anywhere around the face, if they're going over the face or tucked behind the ear, just make note of anything of the face and the neck and the shoulders and clothes and all that, just to give it a little bit more realism. You know, like making a lock of hair coming over the shoulder is going to make it look a little bit nicer than just all of the hair behind the neck. I mean, that's pretty self-explanatory, I guess. And I'm going to be explaining most of my process for this first hairstyle, and then for the second 2 hairstyles, I'm going to speed through some of the parts that I've already explained and just explain how I do those hairstyles in particular differently. Also, when I'm drawing the hair and the chunks, I'm thinking about where the shadows would be and where the highlights would be, so I'm drawing the chunks in ways that when I go over them again, I'll paint the hair in those sections. So it's very helpful to have the sketch down right now so that when I go back over the painting, I know exactly where I'm supposed to paint and what I'm supposed to do. Sometimes I'm not super detailed with a sketch, so I let it do its own thing, but as for this drawing, it was very great to work a little bit more detailed on the sketch. So what I do next is I make a layer under the sketch layer, and I select a base color, and I'm still using the fluffy airbrush that I was using before for the sketch, and I'm gonna just use this kind of a caramel color for the hair, and I'm going to just block in the hair with the airbrush. And using an airbrush for the blocking in to me is kind of important, you'll see in a little bit, just because when I'm going to be putting in more colors, some of them are going to blend a tiny bit, because the airbrush has soft edges, and when you're going to go back in and start painting, it's going to make your color picking process way easier to blend everything when it's a little bit soft on the edges, are a little bit soft, You're not going to have to go back into the color picker to select new colors to make it look a little bit better. It's just a little bit easier when you're working with the airbrush, and some of the colors have already mixed a little bit. So what I do next after this is I'm going to select a shadow color, and the way I do this is I switch the hue a tiny bit on the color wheel and select a color that's a little bit darker. It doesn't really matter if you go warmer or cooler on the color wheel, it's really up to you with whatever tones you want, but it's really good to change the hue because it makes the hair look a little bit more dynamic. It doesn't look very flat. It looks like it has more colors from the color spectrum and from its surroundings and all that. And generally I put the darker color where it would be on the neck and stuff, shadow areas obviously, and just on random parts of the curls. So any place it dents in or it dents out, I just put shadow on that, and then I go in with a highlight, which is the same thing. I change the hue on the color wheel a tiny bit, and I go in and I put highlights, especially on parts of the curl that are sticking the opposite way in which I put the highlight, you know what I'm saying? And then the last thing that I do is I go back to the sketch layer and I lock the transparency, and then I go over it and paint the black lines with a different color, and for this I chose like a dark red, and this will make the image, the painting, look better, because if I was just going to leave the lines black, if I went over and painted it and color picked on the black areas, mixing with the caramel color, it would come out to be this gray unsaturated color and it wouldn't look very good. So using colored lines is going to also help the painting not look very gray whenever you're painting in color. So I'm just going to be using the Bristles Hairy Brush. If you're not in Krita, this is totally fine. You can use any program to paint hair however you want to. It's just a very soft, feathery kind of oil brush, and I love this brush the most. I use it for all of my digital paintings. And I usually just start painting right at the hair base, at the root of it, because, well, I paint the face before I paint the hair, and I just want to make sure that it interacts properly with the face. So, I make sure that it kind of blends a little bit at the root and everything looks fine. And as you can notice, I'm color picking a lot, and that is one thing I really want to stress is whenever you're painting digitally, color picking is very important if you want the image to be blended properly. So if you can see a tiny little box that keeps popping up next to my brush, that's the color picking tool, and in Krita it's just the control key. I'm sure that in Photoshop it's I think something similar. It's Control or Alt. It's either one of those, and you gotta get used to using the color picker. On some tablets, you can use the side of the pen there's like a little button on it, and you can use that as the color picker. I'm just very comfortable with using the control key. And another thing that I do is I change the size of the brush. So my brush settings are set on no transfer dynamics, so it doesn't smudge around like in Paint Tool SAI, and there's no size dynamics attached either. So it's going to be just one solid size. The only thing that's different is there's pressure opacity selected for the dynamics. And that's the only dynamics that I use because I like to change the size of the brush with keyboard shortcuts, and it just lets me have really good control over what kind of effect I'm getting. Whenever I have a small brush, it's very good for detailing, and if I press down really hard, I can get this solid, thin line that's good for the details of the hair, while as in when I make the brush bigger, I can apply softer pressure with my tablet and I get a more of a blending effect, you know? And so I really like being able to control the exact size the brush is at, because whenever I'm painting, I just go back and forth between the details and the blending and making sure it looks painterly. So if I were to use something with a size dynamics attached to the pressure, it's very difficult to have control over some of the edges whenever you're painting. It would make them way harder to blend. Also, when I'm painting, I'm trying to make sure that there's not too much of the shadow or too much of the highlight. I'm trying to make sure that everything is kind of balanced. I'm making sure that wherever the hair is kind of exposed to the environment around it, there's more lights, and where the hair is tucked behind another piece of hair or is in a place that would be more shadowy, it would be darker, you know? So I'm trying to figure out how the hair would look like in real life. And this leads me to talking about if you're painting as a beginner. If you're starting digital painting as a beginner, using reference is very important. I know in a video that I made a while back on how to find your style, I mentioned how using reference isn't ideal, and I wasn't talking about practicing. I was just talking about if you actually want to find your style, that copying is not the best idea. But using reference and using it as a study is a very good idea when you're starting digital painting and you don't really know exactly what you're doing. And using reference for hair, just talking about what the subject right now, the hair, is a great idea. So please grab reference of any type of hair you would like to paint, and you could outline it as well, the chunks that you see of hair that are coming off, and see how the highlights and the shadows are working. And for me right now, I don't really need to use hair reference just because I have a stylized way I do it, I paint it, and I like the way I do it. And I'm pretty confident with how it works. If I needed reference, I would use it, of course, such as hair in water floating. I'm not very good at that, so I will use reference if I need it. So please, if you're not comfortable with painting hair without reference, please just grab some reference and look at it and figure out how it works. It will be very helpful to you. I'm just showing you how I paint my stylized hair, you know, like, whatever. This is not supposed to be super realistic. It's just my tips and whatever. Another thing that I do is I select the background color and I blend it in very faintly with the sides of the hair, or, you know, where I would think that the hair would rotate around the head and it would be shining and reflecting off the background. And the reason I do this is because it makes the hair look a little bit more blended into the background, and if I were to paint this in an environment, it would make the hair and the person look as if she was meant to be in the environment she was in. I think this first hairstyle took me about 30 minutes to paint, and the second two took me about 25 minutes to paint each, and I worked pretty slowly. So another thing is, please don't rush when you're painting hair. I know it can get really tedious, and I know in a lot of my older paintings, and actually in a lot of new paintings as well, I rush when I paint the hair. It's just because I've painted the face, and I really don't want to get into the hair and the clothes and all that, so I just get really bored and I rush through the process. But it's really good if you can have patience when you're painting, that the amount of work you put in, you know, dedication and all that shows in your paintings. So if you just sit down, you get some good music, or you put on a show that you like, and you can sit through painting the hair and, you know, find it enjoyable and just work on the details, it will look so much better than if you decide you're bored and rushed through it. But another thing is, if you've been painting for a while, you might want to break, because it does get really tedious if you're painting for a couple of hours and then you have to start on something new. It just is daunting. I know in this I'm just painting her hair, not the face or anything, so it was pretty rested doing this. But if I had painted the face before, I would probably be pretty cranky. I would probably be rushing through the hair. And so just try to make sure that whichever situation you're in, you're comfortable, you're not stressed painting this, and you're having fun, because I mean that's kind of the point of it. And I'm going to let this one hair demo play in real time, and I'm going to speed up the next two a little bit, and I'm just going to talk a tiny bit about why I've been gone for 2 weeks. I mean, I know I posted last week, but there was no voiceover, it's just a hair demo, and this was because last week I had wanted to do this hair tutorial, but I have been sick with the flu for more than 2 weeks now, and it was very strange because I was coughing a lot, and last week I know that I promised I would make this hair tutorial, but when I got to it, I had recorded the hair process and all that. I could not record the voiceover because I was coughing very, very much. So yeah, I've been gone for 2 weeks because, well, the first week I was very sick. I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't do anything. So I was very sick that day, and then last week I was coughing very much. And I'm still coughing. In this video I'm just cutting everything out, but I'm doing better. Thanks for asking. Another thing that I really like to do is make thicker chunks of hair right in front of the ears. And I know girls don't have that much hair, just coming from in front of their ears and all that, but I kind of like the effect because it always reminds me of elfin hair, And as you can see for this hair painting, I have these kind of two big chunks coming right in front of the ears on the sides of the head. But I like that effect. I mean, if you don't, I'm sorry. Also, I'm very sorry if this video is all over the place. I'm very bad at tutorials, and also I'm really bad at making tutorials when the only thing that I have to go by is how to paint hair, and I don't really know specifics of what you want to learn from the tutorial, so I'm just trying to cover all the bases when I'm painting, and I hope this is helpful. I'm really sorry if it's not. If you have any pointers on how I can make my tutorial better, please let me know. I'm totally open to learn, and yeah, I'm really sorry if this is not super helpful. I'm just gonna let a lot of real-time footage, even though the video is gonna be pretty long, just so that you can get an idea of how I paint if whatever I'm saying does not make any sense. And the next thing I want to talk about is when I'm painting, my hand has this natural curve that it's very good at doing. It just comes from up and down. It's like a little tiny curve. And so whenever I'm trying to paint hair that comes at a different angle, my hand will make a weird mark if it's not at the same angle. So a good idea is to flip your canvas a tiny bit. And in Krita, I just use the number keypad 4, 5, and 6. And to turn it at the angle it is right now, I just hit the 4 button twice, I think, and to get it back to its original state, you just hit 5, and to turn it in the opposite way, you just hit 6. And this way I can just make sure that the stroke I'm making is similar to the one I'm very used to and the one I'm comfortable with and the one I like. And so it just is a good idea to rotate your canvas a tiny bit whenever you're having trouble with some areas. Also, I don't really like to add very harsh highlights to the hair, like, white and a lot of them everywhere. I like to do that when I'm drawing traditionally with like markers and stuff. I think it looks better there. But whenever I'm digitally painting, I try to stay away from a lot of white highlights, even though some hair is really super shiny. I just think it looks a little bit softer when you don't add a bunch of really harsh white highlights. The hair in this has some highlights. It's lighter caramel color at some points, like it's the darker reddish color at the shadows. So I think it looks pretty decent the way it is. If I wanted to add some highlights, I'd probably add some yellowish highlights that were pretty soft right at the end, which I didn't do for this video because I liked the way it was looking, the hair, but I wouldn't really use completely white highlights. So I think that's another thing that I would mention is, I mean, if you want the painting to look a little bit soft or like more oil-like, don't add very harsh white highlights. Not that it's bad, sometimes I do it, it's just it doesn't make the painting and the hair look as soft. Also, when I'm painting curly and wavy hair, I know this is not like curly hair, it's kind of just wavy, like kind of like after a really good blowout. I like to have the hair move around a lot, like it looks like it's moving. So I try to make my marks super swishy and kind of, I don't know, I just try to make sure that they're really weird curves and angles, and they're all kind of, they look like they're flowing. So yeah, it takes a little bit of practice, but I don't really like straight hair because it doesn't have very much movement. I mean, not in real life, just in painting. And so I generally paint pretty wavy hair because I like all the movement that goes on with it, you know, kind of gives it more life. And yeah, that's why I generally paint this kind of hair, just because I like making it look all smooth and pretty and soft, but it still has a lot of bounce to it. Also, when I'm painting sections of hair that are closer to the front of the face, I make sure that they're a little bit lighter, or there's a little bit of shadow behind them on the hair behind that. So as you can see, there's this one section of hair that's coming over her face, and I'm making the hair behind that section a little bit darker so that there's this kind of a clear distinction between the two. And by the way, all of this painting is done on a layer right above the sketch layer and the base color, so it's just a new layer. And yeah, generally whenever I'm painting, I use a total of about 3 or 4 layers for the painting itself, because I like to just have the sketch layer, the base colors, and then the painting right over top. And sometimes I'll add some more effects layer over top, but just for the painting itself, I need 3 layers. So yeah, I'm going to speed this process up a tiny bit because it gets pretty repetitive, nothing much else happens, and I want to talk about the next hairstyles as well. Okay, so for the next hairstyle, I'm going to go back and select the airbrush and go back to the sketch layer, and I'm going to unlock it so I can use it and start drawing on it. And for this hairstyle, I'm going to be doing a short bob with bangs. And I decided to do this hairstyle just because I draw bangs a lot, and I wanted to show you how I go about them. And also, I really like short bobs. I draw them a bunch, so I thought I would show you how I do that as well. And it was also requested on my Instagram. So the first thing that I do is I start with a bangs, and bangs come from kind of a V-section right in front of the head. A useful thing to do is, if you're wondering how to draw a certain hairstyle, watch hairstyling or haircutting videos for that hairstyle, and it will really help you figure out what the sections of hair are doing. So if you watch bang cutting videos, you'll see that a lot of girls will grab this V-section starting from kind of the top of their head, and most of the hair is just kind of coming in that V-section. That's the way I start generally, is I start with a V-section of the bangs, and for this I wanted them to be kind of a little bit messy, and I try to just determine their certain length, how they fall, how they're cut. So the sides on the temple are a little bit longer than right in the middle of the forehead. And the next thing that I do is I kind of figure out right at the back of the neck where it's going to be laying, and also for this haircut it's going to be shortest at the back of the neck. So I just kind of figure out where on the neck it's going to be, and same as before, I'm working with the hair in sections and chunks, figuring out where they're coming from the side of the head and all that. It's not much different from the previous hairstyle in the way I sketch. It's just I had a certain thought in my mind, so I wanted kind of a wavy but shaggy bob, and I'm going about drawing the different sections of hair. So at first I was going to make it all one length, but I had the idea to make the front a little bit longer than the back, so I kind of figured out where the hair would be coming from the top of the head and made those sections in the front, I made them a little bit longer than the back. And then I went back over the bangs and made sure that I liked how everything was lying and how the sketch was working. And for this, I made a tiny little error. I made the top of the hair on the scalp, I made it too close to the scalp, so I didn't give enough volume there. And so you'll see when I choose the base colors, I'm going to go and just color over the lines a little bit, which is totally fine, you know, they're just a guideline. So I'm going to go back to the base color layer, and I'm going to select a color, and I wanted this to be like a very dark lavender indigo color for her hair. I wanted to do black, but I'm really bad at just, I like colors in hair and stuff, and so it was really hard for me to just choose a straight gray for the hair. So I made it a tiny bit like an indigo color. So then I move the color on the color wheel a tiny bit and select a darker color for the shadows. And it doesn't matter again if you're going more to the warm or the cool colors. It really doesn't matter. Just move it a tiny bit. Generally, I would suggest that you move the color wheel towards the cools or the warms for the shadows, and then the opposite for the highlights. That's kind of, I think, what I do, just so that it doesn't get too cool or too warm. And then I'm just going to be applying the highlights at the high parts of the bangs and anywhere around the crown where I would think the highlights would go, you know, like on the high points of the head and on the outside parts of the hair, not really on the inside where there would be the neck and all that. And so for this sketch, I did not change the color of the sketch just because the hair was already very dark and I had in mind to keep it kind of a muted. I wanted to make it black, but you know, it didn't work out. So I didn't really mind the colors of the lines being the way they were. You know, I wanted it to be a little bit more muted and unsaturated. So I left the lines black, but I really like how it turned out. So, you know, change the colors of the lines whenever it's to your advantage. You know, like for the caramel hair, I would not have liked it to be undersaturated, but for this, I kind of wanted that look, so I didn't really care. So I'm going to go back in with my Bristles Hairy brush with the same settings as before, and was just going to start working on the bangs. And bangs, naturally, they are not just like this one straight line of hair on the top of the head. They kind of mess around, and you can see the forehead behind them a tiny bit. So when you're painting them, make sure that you don't make them super clean, unless, you know, that's the look you're going for. You know, somebody who made sure that their bangs are very straight and very neat, you know. Just in general, you know, when you go outside and stuff, the wind and the weather and everything affects your bangs a tiny bit, and they're not super neat. But, you know, I like the messy haircut, so don't mind me. So I'm using a really small brush to kind of add the details right in front of the hair, like little wisps of hair, and to make sure that I can make it look a little bit more jagged and all that. And another thing I want to talk about is how I deal with highlights. And generally, the way I make sure that they look pretty good is I over paint the highlights, if that makes sense. I'll paint more of the hair light than I would actually like it to be, and then I go back in with the darker color and I very gently start to paint over the highlights to make sure that they're going in the exact direction I want them to be, and it blends everything much nicer and it looks more like soft and like an oil painting, rather than if I was to try to struggle to add the highlights in after I painted all the rest of the hair. I don't know, I think it works better for me. So if you would like to, you can try that technique out and see if it works for you. It doesn't really matter, you know, you can do whatever you want to. I just found this works for me really well. Of course, I still, you know, paint highlights over the dark hair sometimes, but I will probably use a smaller brush and apply more pressure so the line is going to be thicker. It's going to be like a different kind of highlight than what I just did on the bangs, which is very soft. See, as you can see on the side of her hair, I am painting in the highlight over the dark part, but I'm using a very thin brush and I'm using a lot more pressure, and it's coming out a lot harder than before. And so I think I've talked about everything I wanted to talk about for this hairstyle and for the bangs and all that. Nothing much is different from the previous hairstyle, how I deal with the rest of the hair. So I'm just going to speed it up and let you watch the video really quickly, because I know this video is already crazy long. Okay, so for the last hairstyle, I'm just going to go back to the sketch layer, select the soft fluffy airbrush, and I'm going to draw colored hair, and I'm going to be painting a random hairstyle, and I'm going to kind of be applying the tips and stuff that I told you before on how I paint hair, and I'm going to be using them to show you how you can paint any hairstyle you would like to. And so for this, I kind of wanted this 60s bang kind of like split down the middle look for this girl with some space buns, and I didn't want her to look very like Sailor Moonish with both sides of her bangs like very even on her face. So I decided to pin back her not mine, her right side of the hair. So you know, it would be like as if she pinned back the bangs or pulled them behind her ear. But for pulling behind the ear, I realized that her bangs were not that long, so then afterwards I'll add 2 bobby pins. And yeah, still treating the hair in sections and adding tiny little wisps afterwards. And it's okay to go back and erase some of your sketch. I did that here because it got way too cluttered, too much going on. I needed it to be a little bit more simple. And so I decided to paint the space buns. And to begin with, as you can see, I made a huge error because I just decided to go in with the different little sections of hair before drawing in the silhouette, and that did not work out. It looked like a croissant or like a bagel, or what's it called? A pretzel. Yeah, a warm pretzel on her head. So I went back in and I drew the silhouette of the space buns and then drew in the sections of the hair, and it looked much better. So there was me following my own advice. And I know this is a very like Tumblr blah 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 hairstyle, like whatever, I'm going with the trends, whatever. But I just think it's kind of a cute hairstyle. And it's a little bit more complex to draw, I think, because there's more sections to it. So yeah, but I just decided to go with this one. Don't judge, no judgment. So the way I drew the space buns is, if you would like to know how to draw a certain hairstyle, as I said before, it's great to go look at tutorials on YouTube on how to do your hair that way. And so if you've ever seen a space bun hair tutorial, you know that the hair is kind of coiled around itself and then bobby pinned or used an elastic to keep it where it is. So I kind of drew the hair a little bit coiled around itself at the top. I tried to do that, and if you have any problems with that, just please grab some reference. No big deal. It will be great. Mine probably would have looked a little bit more realistic if I grabbed some reference, but I did not care. So again, I'm just going for the messy hair, and I'm going to be trying to do her hair pink. And in all honesty, whenever I really like colored hair and I do it pretty well, traditionally speaking, but whenever I'm digitally painting, the way that it turns out good for me is if I do my grayscale to color technique. You know, I paint the hair in black and white and then I go over it and color it in, and it generally turns out better that way if I do it in color that way. But here's me being adventurous and painting it in color to begin with. It looks okay, I guess. I'm not as comfortable with it, but I really like colored hair, so yeah, we'll go with it. So whenever, same thing, when you're painting colored hair, just trying to change the hue of the shadows and the highlights a tiny bit. It will help the painting look a little bit better. And also, as you can see, I'm painting pink hair, and it's kind of, I guess, like a pastel pink, but keep in mind that unless you're going specifically for a certain look, like a very saturated pop art look or whatever, unless you're going for a very saturated look, colored hair fades pretty easily in real life, and when it's in a regular environment, you know, with regular lights and everything, it's not super bright. It's not as bright as it would be on the box when you're trying to dye your hair. So just make sure that you don't use, well, you know, it depends on what you're going for stylistically. I try to not use the most saturated, like the most saturated colors for the hair and all that, because it becomes a little bit too distracting. So I made her hair pink, but I still kept it kind of unsaturated. I think it turned out pretty good. So then I'm just going to go lock the sketch layer, and I use like this rhubarb kind of pink color for the sketch outlines. So then I'm going to go back to my painting layer, and I'm going to grab my bristles hairy brush again, and I'm going to start working on the painting. And of course I start on the bangs, and same thing as before, nothing much has changed. I work on the highlights, then on the shadows, and make sure that everything is blending properly using the size adjust shortcut keys on my keyboard, using the control key, and applying varying levels of hard and light pressure when I'm painting. When I painted the space buns, I made sure that kind of the bottom, the underside of them, was a little bit darker than the top, just because I'm using a pretty ambient light, you know, coming from all around for all of these hairstyles. It's not particularly strong coming from one direction, and so it's just kind of ambient. And if it was like this really soft light everywhere, the underside would be a little bit darker than the top side, you know, because the light would be coming from, I guess, somewhere over top. And so I just made the underside of the buns a little bit darker, and same thing with the hair next to the neck and, you know, under everything else. So the hair that's closer to the outside, it's like a little bit lighter. The hair that's closer to the inside of the neck and any part that's being covered by another lock of hair, I make it a little bit darker, you know. So yeah, not much going on here, same as before. I'm going to speed up the process a tiny bit. And I just wanted to say thank you so much for watching this tutorial. I hope it was helpful. I know I'm not the best teacher, but I try to tell you how I paint hair. Yeah, let me know if you want to see any other hairstyles or anything else in particular about hair that you would like to learn about, or any other tutorials you want me to make. And if you have anything in mind, please be specific, just so that I can know exactly what to talk about, so I don't ramble and talk about dumb things that you don't really need to know or want to know or all that, you know. Just be specific with your questions. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. I have links to my social media listed down in the description. Please follow me on Instagram, because that's where I post mostly. I post mostly every single day, so that would be great if you went and followed me there. And I also have a shop where I sell my original drawings and prints of my digital drawings, which is also going to be in the description. Please check that out, and if you'd like to, please buy something from me, because I package everything with love. That is the reason why you need to buy stuff from me. Okay, cool. I will talk to you guys in my next video. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.